Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's Bridge Lunch Break event, How Michigan Spaces Will or Won't Keep People Here. My name is Amber DeLinde. I'm the Membership and Engagement Director at Bridge Michigan, which is your source for nonprofit, nonpartisan news in Michigan. In this hour, we'll be discussing efforts to build vibrant communities to help grow Michigan's population. This event will focus on efforts to keep Michigan residents here, improve quality of life through placemaking, and attract new residents to jumpstart the state's stagnant population. There are several members of our team joining me during today's conversation, including Jackie Garrett, Fund Development Associate, and our discussion today will be moderated by Bridge Michigan Business Editor Paula Gardner. Our special guest panelists today include Marty Fittante, CEO of InvestUP, Rachel Gray, Executive Director of Hello West Michigan, and Joshua Sirefman, CEO of Michigan Central, the mobility-focused innovation district started by Ford Motor Company in Detroit. They will discuss Michigan's places and spaces and their role in growing the state's population. I'll be dropping a link for where you can see each of their biographies and sort of their roles and their organizations in just a moment into the chat. Our conversation will begin in just a moment, and Paula will lead the discussion with our panel for about 40 to 45 minutes, and we'll then turn to your questions. We've gathered the questions that you submitted when you registered for today's event, and we're also taking your questions via the chat. So please remain muted throughout today's discussion, but if you have questions for our panelists, please feel free to type them into the chat at any time. And Jackie and I will be sending those to Paula to ask in the final portion of our event. We are recording today's conversation, as you heard, and it will be posted on Bridge Michigan's website this week. You can subscribe to our daily or our Business Watch newsletters by visiting www.bridgemi.com and click subscribe. Events like this one are made possible by the support of Bridge members, who are individuals who donate any amount to our nonprofit newsroom. If you'd like to join this membership community, we'll drop a link to do so in the chat. As a reminder, please stay muted throughout today's conversation, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say. I'll now pass the microphone over to Paula to get us started.
Thanks, Amber, and welcome everyone to this discussion. Bridge has been covering a lot about population in Michigan and kind of where it stands and what it means to us as residents, as parents who hope to keep their children here, as community members, and so many different levels. And it seems like there's a lot of discussion about what Michigan needs to do. I wanted to focus this conversation on the places, and how places make a difference for us. But before we got started, we were all kind of talking a little bit about kind of a basic question that I've been getting from readers, and it seems like many of us are trying to answer it. It's like, I'd like to hear from each of you. When you think about people who say, why should we get bigger? Why should we worry about our population? What's your immediate answer to that?
Well, I'm happy to kick it off, Paula. Thank you for that question. So, when I think about this question, it's really because of a fundamental shift in how economic development happens. It used to be that people chased jobs, but now jobs follow people. Companies will not relocate here unless there is a job-ready population and a great workforce here. And that still sounds like a lot of economic development conversation. That's the baseline reason. But when you think about what a talent shortage looks like in your daily life, that's walking into your favorite restaurant and there's, they're not open on Monday or Tuesdays anymore because they don't have staff, or they're open and there's tables open, but they say, you're going to sit there and wait at least an hour for food. Or rolling blackouts at your kid's daycare center where it's a random Thursday and the classroom is closed because there's simply not enough workers. Things like that, that's where we really start to feel the talent crunch and our demographic issue in our daily lives.
Paul, just to add, and first, thanks so much to Bridge for highlighting the challenge of population, because I do think it's important, and I think in really inherent in the question that you ask is, it's incumbent upon us as the economic development community to really educate around that. And so as Rachel said, there are certainly implications to community development and economic development that are really important, but it's broader than that also. And it affects everything from congressional representation and what that means to the state to how our schools are funded. And for us, that's really significant because let me just give you one data point relative to education in the Upper Peninsula. And that is since 1970, the UP has lost 48% of its K-12 population. if you had, before today's budget, which I think is going to be favorable with education funding, but if you had that same level of students in Upper Peninsula schools today that you had in 1970, it would be an additional $300 million to UP schools. So imagine what that means to education in our region, to our communities, having those dollars socialized, not just for education, but for the betterment of community and our economy. So at the end of the day, I think that's a really important question, because it becomes incumbent upon us then to educate for those that don't quite understand that. And we've done surveying as an organization using Richard Zubin and Glenn Gariff. And the question that you start with is really one that people don't appreciate, because our polling suggests that very thing, that a vast majority of people don't have top of mind the implications of population loss.
Josh?
Yeah, thanks, Paula. I would just add to Rachel and Marty's comments. I mean, growth is, in essence, the holy grail underlying successful economic development, and also successful, thriving communities. And I mean, you can look at any metric, you can look at any city in the country, any region, and there will be 100% direct correlation between growth and any measure of the overall economic health of the community. It's also, something to be managed. And, one of the incredible things, one of the exciting things for Michigan is that there's the opportunity to actually think smartly about how to manage growth. And it's not something that's just as simple as just growth is good, but it is good, but it has to be thought about proactively. And it's an incredibly powerful tool, though, to achieve everything else we want to do. Great environments, great cities, great suburbs, great communities, you name it, all gets fueled underlying it by growth.
I think a lot of our conversation also is on college grads. And I'm wondering, give me your elevator pitch to somebody who's 22 years old, just finished their undergraduate degree, and they're looking all over the country for the place where they want to move and start their careers. What do you tell them?
I'm happy to go first on that, because I have this conversation actually in reality a lot.
Yeah.
I actually tell them I think Michigan and I think Detroit is the future, and I think it's already happening. I think it's the future. You see it in the areas of where innovation is thriving. You see it in the ability to actually have impact, and in the work that you do, in your participation in the community you're in. And you see it in the combination of those things with a quality of life that you just don't find anywhere else. And so we talk all the time about this. I think literally the future is actually happening, and way more than people realize in Detroit. There's so much going on that is, if you want to start a company, if you want to learn new skills, if you want to be at the forefront, this is the place to be.
I want to get to the other two, but just to follow up with Detroit, I've been in Michigan my entire life, and I watched people write off Detroit. And sometimes I do wonder what the understanding is of the city now, outside of the city. When I come down to Michigan Central and I see what's happening there, it amazes me. But I'm not like, how do you see the reputation of the city and kind of the conveyance of its amenities and what it has to offer outside of the core city?
We've got companies at Michigan Central that have actively chosen to leave places like Austin, Texas, to come here. Mm-hmm. We have individuals who've made choices like that. We have companies from Europe who have contacted us saying, we want to enter the North American market, and Michigan Central is where we want to do that. Next, in 2 weeks, we've got 800 people, global corporate leaders, coming for a major TED event here, part of their sort of countdown series. What I am seeing all the time is that the narrative about Detroit has changed, that people are excited about, they know things are happening. They may not know exactly what, but they know that it's a hotbed of interesting activity happening, and they're super curious and interested. And so I see this all the time, and in some ways more so from people outside Michigan than locally.
That's interesting. Rachel, what's your elevator pitch? I use amazing to describe Grand Rapids too, but how do you pitch it?
Well, so I was one of these students that had a choice of, do I stay in Michigan or do I go? And, for me, I applied to jobs all over the country and then found this perfect fit here in West Michigan. And, really building on what Josh said, I really immediately discovered that I had access to all of the amenities that a lot of larger metros have at a much lower cost of living. So that was big because I was working for a nonprofit and I was a new grad with student loans to repay. But, the other point he makes about change makers and really having that access to community leaders. Here in West Michigan, I started serving on, nonprofit boards and committees within 6 months of graduation. And that was something that I think, a lot of young people, certainly millennials, this is trademark of the millennial generation, but definitely Gen Z, is that we want to have an impact on where we live and we want to have an impact on our community. And that's possible in West Michigan, right? You don't have to wait until you're a seasoned professional and apply to a board and raise a certain amount of money to sit there. You can do it from day one, and you can roll up your sleeves and get to work. And that doesn't always exist in other communities. And so I think that was a huge piece for me and why I loved it here. And I talked to a lot of students through our West Michigan Intern Connect program, and many of them are from Michigan or go to schools in Michigan, and they just aren't aware of what's around them, right? If you grew up in Michigan, chances are the things you're doing on the weekend or in the evenings are kind of similar to what your parents did or what your parents exposed you to. And if that's not where your interests lie and you want to go somewhere else because you think it's there, whenever I'm talking to a student, a local student, I always ask them, where are you thinking about going and what do you want? And why do you think you want to go there? And then say, well, did you know we have that thing here in Michigan? And sometimes it's just about awareness.
I love the comment about impact and how younger people actually want to have impact on where they live. I think, I always looked at cities as, something existing that I would plug into as opposed to affect change. Marty, the UP has some real bright spots for Michigan, and also, as Ron French showed us this week, is really struggling in other areas. So what's your elevator pitch to somebody maybe thinking about a bright spot or even one of the struggling areas?
I would ask, how long's the elevator ride, Paula? So, and I say that jokingly, but I think it's reflective of kind of the passion and the opportunity that Rachel and Josh talked about. And I'm so excited to see what's going on in Detroit, a graduate of Wayne State myself. But to take maybe a more Team Michigan approach, as Quentin Messer often talks about, I would say, because the UP is part of this, Michigan is one incredibly beautiful state with 2 unique peninsulas and 4 spectacular seasons. And I think that's something we have to be really mindful of, that play home to countless opportunities that have welcoming appeal to any interest from recreators through our unmatched natural resource amenities and assets that we're so blessed with here in the UP, to innovators with historic culture and commitment to innovation, to budgeters with affordable communities and plentiful good paying jobs. So that would be how I would narrate that, Paula, but can certainly drill down and be more UP specific also.
Yeah, I'd like to hear, why should I consider a move to Marquette? What's there for me?
Yeah, I think people are suggesting that with their pocketbook right now, right? So we're seeing such incredible travel to the Upper Peninsula. And, the old adage is, if it's a great place to visit, it's a great place to live. If it's a great place to live, it's a great place to work. And if it's a great place to work, it's a great place to do business. And so for us, we've got to figure out some of the infrastructure challenges that we have, like housing, to take advantage of that great interest that there is in the quality of life and the natural resources that we have here. So, if you're in Marquette, you see some of the vibrancy of that community. But a big part of that is that trail network. And you're seeing that over in Houghton as well, with really robust recreational resources. And it's budding down in Dickinson County and in Delta County. So that's, I think, one of the common themes and one of the opportunities that definitely exists in the Upper Peninsula that is part of, I think, the whole opportunity in the state. It's just a little bit different here in terms of what that recreational economy looks like.
I framed a question as, what are the complaints that you hear? And I asked that towards looking for solutions or figuring out what our barriers are. Like when you find out that somebody considered us but rejected us, what are their reasons? What is top of mind for you, or what do you think you can solve there?
I can go first this time. For us, it's the weather, which I find so ironic in light of what's going on around the country today. As Governor Whitmer is fond of saying, there's no bad weather, only bad gear. Well, that same principle doesn't prove true when you're at consistent temperatures of 100 degrees or greater. You can't gear up for it, and you can only gear down for it, in certain respects before you have some other challenges. So from my perspective, it's really stop complaining about it and embrace it. And we know in the Upper Peninsula, our 4 seasons aren't for everyone, but there's certainly an opportunity if you're willing to embrace it. And that's what is appealing to you. So I think along the lines of what Rachel said, sometimes we're our own worst enemies in terms of conveying the virtue, and that we fail to consider just how blessed we are with the 4 seasons that we have, particularly as you contrast it to what's going on around the country and around the world with regard to climate.
I would agree. We often hear no mountains and no weather, at least no mountains in our area in West Michigan. I will say, I do think that the Northern Lower Peninsula and the Upper Peninsula do a much better job at embracing winter and telling that story. I think, here in the West Michigan area, there's a little bit of that. We definitely talk about 4 seasons. I just don't know if it's like as embraced here on a population-wide level of people really getting out there and enjoying the snow and winter. I love it. I actually look forward to it. But that's because I embrace a winter snow sport, right? That's why I love to get out. And weather's not going to change. So it's really, how do we sell it? And how do we find the people who are okay with it and help them get comfortable when they get here? I think in our area, one of the things that is very difficult is finding friends. So when you look at, people who are attracted here by all the things we sell, right? So great economic opportunity, low cost of living, they're recruited here for a job, and then they can't make friends. So if they're not a boomerang, if they're a new relocatee, that's really difficult. And it's not just a West Michigan thing. It's not just a Michigan or Midwest thing. This is very prevalent across the nation. And it's a culture thing. In general, our culture is moving towards, we're losing spaces to make friends. And there's no, meeting people in line anymore because we're all on our phones. But it becomes a big issue when you've been here for, 18 months and you realize I don't have any plans on Friday night or Saturday. And, on maybe the 2-year mark is when my clause is up for, I can go relocate somewhere else and it's not going to hurt me financially. And so that's a real issue. And it's one that doesn't get talked about a lot, but people who are community builders need to work on that.
Thank you. Josh, what complaints do you hear?
I'm not sure we hear complaints. I think in the Detroit context, I think education, K through 12, is something, is a concern. And, sometimes affordable housing, although, that's a nuanced issue, because compared to a lot of metropolitan areas around the country, we've got more options than many. I will say, because we're also dealing with a sort of specific segment of the population. The biggest thing for us is actually the opportunity that much deeper venture capital communities, for example, offer. And it's for us, it becomes much more about, if I can start a company here, but I'm going to hit a point where scaling it just becomes that much easier if I can put myself on the coast and I have access to just much greater, venture capital communities, a different mindset, and those kinds of things. So for us, we encounter those kinds of challenges, I think, more frequently.
Interesting. I guess it really is hard for me to think of weather as the biggest drawback. I think of Chicago and I see the winter news clips and I think that looks terrible, but people choose Chicago. Boston doesn't appeal to me. Parts of Texas and some times of the year, sound terrible. I just talked to somebody in Phoenix. It's 110 degrees there last week when I was talking to her. And I feel like weather's kind of obvious in a sense, but we're not going to solve it. And it's not like other places haven't gotten around it either. So how do we how do we move past that? And I like to use the word allure. Like Chicago has an allure, no matter what, how bad Lake Michigan is in the winter there. What gives us a little bit of an edge here? Like what makes Detroit an allure for more people? Or Grand Rapids seems to have it, but it's still a certain size. Or how many other cities in Michigan actually have something that can attract somebody from out of state? And where do we take that?
I'm happy to go first. One thing on the weather, and I'll get to the allure question. There's a flip side, and you see it in some of the chat comments. The flip side of the weather is, while coming from a obviously terrible reason, but the climate in Michigan is way better than a whole lot of the country. Mm-hmm. And, I'm not sure it's the kind of thing you broadcast given the circumstances as to why that is, given, all the pressures on climate change. But I think it's the kind of thing increasingly, honestly, is an asset. And over time is just going to become, sadly, but more and more so. I think the allure of Detroit, it's an incredible city. It's incredibly vibrant. There's art, culture, food, community. The thing I always tell people, and it's non-scientific, but in Detroit, you can do stuff and in a way that you just can't in so many cities. And so I think it's got incredible allure. And there's a ton of effort that's gone into the amount of public space and high quality public space in Detroit now is extraordinary from where it was. You think about the Taconider Cut and the Greenway and the riverfront and what's getting built on the waterfront, Ralph C. Wilson Park, Roosevelt Park today, literally right after this call, we're celebrating with the mayor and others, the city's total reinvigoration of Roosevelt Park. So, piece by piece, there's all kinds of amazing things that building on what's always been here. And it's a real city. It's a real city with all kinds of, all the wonderful things that brings. So I don't know, I think it's got, maybe I've drunk my own Kool-Aid, but I think it's got incredible allure.
We have to drink our own Kool-Aid. That's why we're in the jobs we're in, right? Paula, I think you're absolutely right about the weather. It stinks that people complain about it. Everything that you said is correct. But see, people still complain about it. And you're right, Chicago still attracts people. Minneapolis still attracts people, even though it's really, really cold there, colder than, parts here in Michigan. But people still complain about it. And, for people who I think experience the Midwest weather and have never experienced a really hot Texas or Arizona summer, they don't realize that some of these other places, every state has an indoor season. And so until you realize that in Phoenix right now, you go from your air-conditioned house to remote start your air-conditioned car to your air-conditioned office and back. Some people live like that in Michigan winters when they don't have to. And so you're absolutely right, but people still complain about it. When it comes to allure, that's about marketing and branding, right? You think about the allure that some of these other cities have. That doesn't happen overnight. It's very intentional. Sometimes it's organic and then they build on it intentionally. But you have to work at it, and it is hard. It's very hard, especially now that every city and every community is coming up with their slogan or their claim to fame. I was just at a conference actually with talent attraction folks like myself from all over the country. And so each community, we're all trying to do the same thing. And what that does is it makes it a really crowded marketplace when people are looking at, where do I want to live next? But, when you think about the allure that some of these tier 1 cities have, keep Austin weird, Denver for outdoor recreation, things like that, those have been cultivated over a really long time. So, when we don't necessarily have that, like I think Detroit has a much deeper story and a deeper history they can pull on. I think everyone loves, they love the Detroit. I love the Detroit versus everybody t-shirts because that's a story that people can really be a part of. In West Michigan, I think we've had a very solid foundation for a very long time. Like we've always been very reliable. And so people have a consistent experience when they come here that it's a great place to raise a family. And that's something that we've really had here in West Michigan. And I do think that in the last 10 years, we've really been hitting, trying to hit to the next level. things like Art Prize have really elevated that story outside of Michigan. Now Art Prize can't just be Art Prize. That can't be like the one thing that we have here. We have to continue to placemake and do other things and build that narrative.
I did want to ask, like, you're marketing all over the country to people to come to West Michigan. Where are your successes? Like, do you have pockets where people might be more receptive to your messaging?
I mean, certainly there's a lot of Michiganders in the Chicagoland area. So as Hello West Michigan, we're a small nonprofit. We only have 2 full-time staff members, and we do not have a pure Michigan size marketing budget. So we have to be really, really surgical in the targeting. So we don't blanket the whole country in campaigns. We're really looking at who are most likely to click on those ads. And for us, that's boomerangs. People who have a connection here to Michigan. So people who have traveled here, they grew up here, or they went to college here. Any of those sort of work because they've experienced the West Michigan community. And so that's who we target. And those people could be anywhere around the country. So like location wise, we don't necessarily have pockets. I think Chicago is kind of a natural one, certainly. But beyond that, we don't necessarily have pockets.
Marty, a lure in the UP for year-round residents seems to be your university towns in large part. I don't know if you'd agree. Why don't you tell me what your allure is?
I would agree. And, I think the students, we're blessed with 21,000 higher education students are a big part of that, as is kind of the thought leadership there as well. When you would ask the previous question, Paula, is around the complaint of that we hear most frequently. And I do think it's the weather, and maybe part of that's just human nature, but it's certainly not the biggest obstacle. And like Josh, I think there's real opportunity actually in the weather as we move forward. And I think in terms of obstacles for us in the college towns are, I think, helping prove that out. And it's much like you see in Chicago as you use that example, but it's that community vitality, right? And so you've got more vitality, I think, in those communities. And it really gets to the point I think that Rachel made earlier, and that is that now talent attracts employers, and it's community that attracts talent. And so we've got to build vibrant and vital communities. And part of that's those assets within the community, like Art Prize. Part of it's our education as well. And having a higher education institution anchored there is certainly helpful, but it's important that our K-12 system is also thriving, because that's a big ingredient of what people are going to look to in these communities. Safe, what's the education look like? What's the quality of life? What's the cost of living? So it's all those kind of ingredients, but you see some of that along the lakefront in Chicago in terms of how they've set aside all of that public space there, right? That's a special part of what they have in Chicago and those restaurants. So for us, it's then taking what's our strategic asset, like that lakefront in Chicago, and turning it into, part of that community vitality. And that's undoubtedly our allure as our natural resources that we're so abundantly blessed with.
Josh, I was hoping that you might talk a little bit, as we think about our built environment. I think Detroit offers so many opportunities to see the things that we need to be talking about up close with things like zoning and transportation and all of that. But like, you're running something that is trying to attract entrepreneurs, but shaping and reshaping a neighborhood to do that. And I'm just wondering, like, what kind of decisions went into some of the decisions you made about how to create this place, and where you expect it to go, and what kind of feedback you're getting from it that might be even changing some of your direction, expanding it, anything.
Yeah. So, there's sort of 2 objectives for us at Michigan Central. One is to build and foster literally a world-leading and hopefully even world-changing ecosystem of entrepreneurs, academics, community, investors, you name it, all focused around innovative work that we define as at the intersection of mobility and society. And so that's sort of our work, is to really foster that ecosystem. But there's a second objective that is equally important, and they really reinforce each other, which is to make Michigan Central an extraordinary place, and a place that is truly welcoming for all. And, if you think about this underlying decision, so first and foremost is a huge decision that seems obvious, but it's really important, which is the physical epicenter of the work we're doing are two extraordinary historic buildings that fell on hard times. And, you know, we're not starting with the build out of a sparkling new glass buildings. We're doing this first and foremost. I'm speaking now from this incredible 1936 Albert Kahn design warehouse. It was a facility for the Postal Service to handle the mail coming through the train station. Then, you know, was a storage facility for Detroit public schools, and then sat empty and abandoned for 35 years. And you know, over the next year, we'll be opening up the former train station, which, you know, became the international poster child for, you know, ruin porn and the sort of notion of the decline of not just Detroit, but the American city. And there's something incredibly powerful about extraordinarily future-facing work happening in these buildings that have been with us and have such a longer and deeper story. So I think that's a huge decision that you know, again, seems obvious, but it's really powerful. I think secondly, we're very, very cognizant of becoming a part of a larger community, and there's nothing, you know, we don't want to be, there's nothing gated about the work happening or the feel of it or the place we're building, in addition to the existing public space that the city's invested in around us. We're building another 14 acres of public space. The ground floor of the train station will be a public asset. You know, we want to embrace people and pull people in. I think third, the ethos and part of the work for us is the whole point of Michigan Central is it's not some place to go and secretly test the technology. It's to sort of understand how do you advance new ideas into the real world. And that involves working with real people and real communities. And so, you know, even in the work that we're doing, it's that integration with the neighborhoods around us, with the communities across the city and more broadly, that's sort of foundational to what Michigan Central is trying to achieve. So, you know, those are just a handful that come to mind of things that really sort of are driving how we think about what we're doing.
I'm curious too, because there are two other innovation districts, I believe, that are proposed for Detroit. I'm thinking of the University of Michigan and Henry Ford Health System. So, like, would you see what you're doing as related there, or, you know, islands? You know, how do you integrate all of that to kind of become bigger than the three?
You know, one of the beautiful things about what's happening in Detroit is that I think anyone's success is everybody's success. And so I think, and I think the folks at Henry Ford, I think the University of Michigan team, also, you know, there's people at Bedrock also sort of trying to foster different segments of the economy and foster innovative work. I think it's all additive, and I think it actually helps enormously to have these multiple efforts. And, you know, if you look at the work that's happening, we're very focused on mobility. And so that's everything from electrification and the implications, that's advanced aerial mobility, drones and eVTOLs and the implications of that. That's alternative energies. It's intersectional mobility. So where mobility is actually something to help solve, whether it's access to food or it's healthcare or whatever it may be. So, you know, we're sort of focused on a certain segment of the economy. And I think it's additive and complementary to what the others are doing. And then ultimately we need all these pieces. So, and amongst us, we talk a lot about collaboration. I think everybody shares that mindset, and I think it's all, you know, I think we add to each other.
I think, you know, I mentioned just offhandedly kind of density, zoning. It's like, I'm wondering, when you consider your communities and what's considered desirable, and I keep saying young people, but like the people who are most likely to move and start careers, or to really invest in starting a business, or things that would actually take root and be really meaningful population-wise and community-wise. It seems like, you know, we want dense communities, we want public transportation. I say we, I'm not one of those young people, but like density, public transportation, walkability. And there seems to be some disdain perhaps for suburban communities versus urban. That's like, we want the city experience. And Metro Detroit doesn't have a lot of that. So when you think about like the actual physical aspects of a community that you're in right now, or other communities in Michigan that have the potential to pull more people in, like how do we need to change them, or how do we need to approach the structure of them that's underpinning them differently?
So I do think that the we in that question is a little bit of a generalization. I think, one thing we've really seen during COVID is really there's been some shift in what people want, right? People were not loving the cities during COVID. They were looking for more space. And I think one of the beautiful things about Michigan, and not just Grand Rapids, not just Detroit, but many of our more populous communities, they really offer a nice commute shed. So what I mean by that is, in Grand Rapids, I could work downtown and I could live in a downtown condo, or I could live only 25 minutes away and live on a farm. Completely rural, have a lot of acreage, have farm animals, and still have a very doable average commute to downtown. And, we of course have the lakeshore. You do have the suburban communities and the small towns, and then the urban. And at least in West Michigan, but, from my other partners around the state, I think this is definitely an asset in more than just my region, is we really have this great diversity of setting, right? What do you want to see when you look outside your kitchen window? This great diversity of setting within these compact spaces. So it's possible to, again, work in the urban downtown, or to work out in one of the suburbs and live in your downtown condo. That's possible in a lot of places in Michigan, which is a huge asset, because then we can be attractive to a broader range of people, not just the people who want to live in a city, or not just the people who want to have space.
Marty, your space is a little bit different. What are you thinking?
For us, it's obviously a little bit different. And so, I actually looked at maybe the flip side of that coin. And for us, as an economic development organization, and those that we represent, we desire that growth. And oftentimes what we encounter is really getting back to that first question that we had about population and maybe some of the sensitivities around it. There's opposition to some of that growth. And so how do we help educate around some of that opposition? There was a significant development that was chased out of Houghton by virtue of the fact that people weren't comfortable with it being along the canal, and it would have been a beautiful kind of mixed use addition. So I think that's also part of the challenge that we have in maybe more rural communities is, this isn't how we've done it. This isn't what we're accustomed to. I'm comfortable with how things are. So how do we find that balance that permits, I think, the growth or the vitality that I talked about, and those community assets that we need to really appeal to the generation behind ours, and get maybe those that for their own reasons are concerned about that type of growth. And that's a challenge that we've had more than one community here.
Mm-hmm. What should be the role of the state to actually find some changes now, soon?
So the state's working on a big talent campaign right now, which is fantastic. Because like I said, in West Michigan, we don't have a pure Michigan-sized budget for talent attraction. It's a teeny budget. We're supported by member companies, and so we do what we can with it. But remember, I was just at this conference with lots of talent attraction people from all over the country. This is becoming a crowded space. Every community around the country is saying, my city is a great place to live, work, and play. We're a vibrant, magnetic community. There's a lot of noise in that space, which means you have to have a lot of dollars to command that space and really get eyes on that kind of campaign. And so the state is doing that, which is fantastic, because while, my region has a small team of 2 people, we're actually the largest regional talent attraction organization in the state. So let that sink in. We're the oldest in the country, and we're the largest in the state, and we're still just 2 people. And so we need that help and that push from the state to be able to have eyes on that campaign and be able to push that Michigan message. But we also need support for our regional talent attraction initiatives so that they can do the boots on the ground work. So that when, you know, someone clicks through on that campaign and says, yeah, I'm interested in coming to Saginaw, the person in Saginaw can say, hey, I'm looking at your resume. I see there's opportunities for you here. I know some of my companies that are looking for talent like you. Or, you know, when someone calls with concerns and says, hey, you know, I'm looking at moving to your area. These are, you know, some circumstances that my family has that we, you know, are looking for in our new community. What are the answers to that? Someone needs to be an expert in the community to be able to answer those questions. And so that the state has a really important role with the campaign, but then also that support for regional talent attraction organizations is absolutely critical.
I would agree, Paula. The state's got an important role, and I compliment the governor for coming out with the population commission. Issues need champions, and I think that's part of the state's role here. Is it needs to champion these issues, and I think part of the space where we see the state needs to play, and they've certainly made strides in that. You know, 2 years ago, you really had one legislator talking about population, and that was Ken Horn. And now you've got a legislature that's focused on some of those issues that are very important to growth, like housing. We actually have a committee now in the House that's focused on some of the change that we need for housing, because that's really undermining, it's foundational to any opportunity for growth, and childcare. So, you know, from our perspective, I think the state needs to lead on policy change and then providing the resources that Rachel talked about. And then I hope it's getting out of the way, because regions and cities know better how to make vibrant communities. And so if we can have the state championing policy, championing the message, and then providing the resources and entrusting that to us locally, I think there's real opportunity in that. And so I think we're making strides towards that end.
Josh, what should the state be doing?
You know, I think they're doing a ton of great stuff, and you know, we have a very functional collaboration, a formal partnership with the state and the city of Detroit. A couple of things that come to mind. I think one of the challenges, I mentioned this before in a different context, I think we all need to be working together to figure out how we really can become more competitive in the entrepreneurial, for the entrepreneurial environment, and particularly focus on where there's gaps in the ecosystem that have real impact. And I think the venture investing is a hugely important theme for us. I think another area is, you know, there's a very eye-opening study done by Detroit Future City and the Brookings Institute about the growth economy, jobs in the growth economy, leaving enormous segments of the community behind, and particularly Black and Brown residents, and not just in Detroit, but beyond Detroit. But you know, we one of the great assets of Detroit, and I think of Michigan is being a diverse community, and we have to it's not just about attracting talent. We have an incredible talent base here that has to have opportunities to get the same training, the same access to skills development. And I think, and this is something, by the way, we're working closely with the state on. I think they're very cognizant of it and very focused on it. And then I would say, lastly, sort of aggressively embrace innovation from a policy perspective. It's, you know, it's a little bit easy to sort of focus on the kinds of things, and they're super important, you know, battery plants and the sort of those kinds of economic development initiatives, but it's also super important to really focus on some things that are a little bit less known, and innovation falls in that category. And how do you foster that really aggressively?
Glad you brought up the diversity aspect. I do think, like, embracing all is one strategy to actually grow, right? It's like, you know, not having pockets of people and trying to attract and trying to, I don't know, you know what I mean? I don't want to keep going there. Housing is coming up a lot in the questions, and Marty, you mentioned it. What could you accomplish with more and different housing, and what types of housing is the biggest voids in your community right now?
We need all housing. You know, it spans the range. And so, you know, when I talked about the state providing resources and then maybe empowering us, they've provided that opportunity in housing. So they entrusted us with $15 million that we are standing up as we speak. to be the last money in for housing development here to try to bring down those costs to get some development built. And so, we believe from some of the data that we see that that's really inhibiting growth at this point. And so we'll see if that proves true, but very confident based upon the data that we've got that this will be, part of that difference maker to start to root some population opportunity here. And when you consider, again, the strength, the strategic asset that we have with our natural resources, we need to then kind of embrace that as we're building these new housing developments out. And you see that, I think, in Bentonville is a good example of that. They credit 1,000 people a month moving to Bentonville, new people moving to Bentonville, just by virtue of the fact that their trail system is so well received. So we've got that same opportunity here. And if we can start building that infrastructure out, I think there's real opportunity for growth.
Rachel, the competition for housing in Greater Grand Rapids has been pretty intense for a very long time. What's your thought on housing?
Housing, I've been doing this work for 10 years now, and housing has really come up to be the top of the, in every single conversation, I would say for at least the last 2 years. So it's really, really become top of mind. I think with housing, it's a very complicated issue. So, when I'm looking at it from the talent attraction perspective, yes, it's absolutely needed. I don't know as though I'm necessarily the person to work on it. And thankfully, we have other partners here in West Michigan who are experts in the housing industry and are working on these issues. So, I can bring feedback from the job seekers that I'm working with and the relocatees. I can bring feedback from our employers who definitely say workforce housing is one of their biggest needs for sure. And then, really try to help our community partners so that they can dig in with that feedback.
Josh, how's housing affecting you at this point?
I think for us, we have an opportunity to participate in development of new housing ahead of us. And we'd love to, keep building on the communities that are here and add mixed income housing all around us. And back to your density point, increase density in the communities around us. And housing's a huge piece of that. And we have an interesting opportunity. We're not there yet, but I think we'll have an interesting opportunity for properties that we control to do really interesting things around, are there opportunities to create ownership structures that are focused on long-term wealth creation? Are there, ways to approach mixed income development in creative ways? So, for us, we're not there yet, but we hope to play a role in pushing on how can housing be contributing to and developed in a way that it contributes to a really vibrant community.
So when you think about solutions, particularly from the state's perspective, should resources be allocated equally according to geography, or do we invest more in the places that already have a jump start? How do we allocate resources? And then the follow-up is, how do we recognize that they're working? How do we gauge success?
I'll jump in first on that. One thing you started to go down the path of before is a sort of relationship between city and surrounding region. And I think Detroit is perhaps unique in the Michigan context. I'm a huge believer that a healthy city is critical to a healthy and thriving region. And I think investing in that and really working with that sort of approach that says that the city is the nerve center, and investment in the city is an investment in the region. And just on a very myopic basis at Michigan Central, we see that already, where the work happening has an impact beyond just what's happening literally within our property. So, for example, we have a company who is already they've got people here, but there's a manufacturing facility they're now doing elsewhere in Detroit, and they're looking at properties in the region in Southeast Michigan for additional expansion. And you have to think about it holistically. And for obvious reasons, I think strategically investing in where you're getting that biggest impact is critical.
Actually, while you were speaking, I was thinking of some of the conversations I've been having with some of the 22-year-old MSU grads recently. And when they say Detroit, they do not mean North Macomb County. They do not mean, Western Oakland County. They actually do mean the city.
Yeah.
They could end up in some of those places, but what they're actually looking at is the city.
Yeah. It's exciting.
Yeah. So what are Marty and Rachel, what are you thinking of allocation of resources?
So I have to be honest. My region doing really well population wise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kent and Ottawa counties, some of the fastest growing counties at one point in the nation, but certainly in Michigan from 2010 to 2020. So it really kind of stinks, right? When the state as a whole is not doing well, right? When we've seen these articles about the Michigan population not overall not being great, because then I get lumped in with that. And so I truly believe that the state as a whole, we all need to be winning for, because I can have my success carved out on its own, but I don't want to be an island on my own, right? I want to share in the success of the whole state. And so I do think it's important that that we are helping all of the regions because they all are a part of our state and they all have something to give.
Marty?
I was hoping time might expire before you got to me, because this is a hard question politically, when you represent a region that's bigger than 9 states. So, 15 counties in the UP, all with great pride. And I certainly understand the basis of the question. My own circumstances indicative of the challenge for us. I live in Iron Mountain, was raised in Escanaba, and honestly, that's where my heart still is. And I have an office in Marquette. And so it gets really difficult for us to not look at things regionally. And that's what we try to do, is to go where opportunity is regionally. But your question's a really fair question, right? Because the state can't be everything to everyone. And so I do think targeted and strategic investments, as difficult as it is to say, do make some sense. But I do think in the context of that, the state is stronger together because we are so diverse in the assets that we have to offer. So I think it's really identifying what the opportunities look like through those assets and then investing in those. So again, a big part of that is community from our perspective, and recognize that policymakers have difficult decisions to make there, but can certainly understand why that question is top of mind for many.
So how do we know if we're successful? Because population numbers move fairly slowly. There are births, there are deaths, there's in-migration, there's out-migration, and eventually you end up with something, we're in a place. How do we know if we're successful with knowing that we have to be patient too?
So this is something we've been working on for a long time. Again, Hello West Michigan being the first organization of our kind in the country dating back to 2007. Our numbers and metrics have evolved over time because we've been getting this question from media outlets for a long time. And so, there are the macro numbers, right? What is happening in your community in terms of migration, looking at either the census or looking at moves. But when you are looking at, just our organization, right, is Hello West Michigan making an impact? We try to look at our programmatic numbers because that's what we have control over. So we have a weekly resume pack, and so we send candidates out to companies and people get hired. And so we look at how many people are we helping to get hired here in West Michigan and are moving here. Now we're really looking at how can we take that a step farther and look at what is the economic impact of one hire. So since 2013, we've had over 1,700 hires, but what does it look like if we put that in context of dollars? So for a segment of that time from about 2016 to 2020, the hires that we had in that time actually represent $131 million in payroll. And so when you start looking at in terms of dollars and what are these people bringing in, especially because the people who are most likely to relocate, they're mobile educated professionals. So they have college degrees. Over 80% of the candidates that we're bringing in have college degrees, which helps on a host of other economic development benchmarks. So that's important. And then really looking at, we're also looking at how we can look at perception surveys. So if there's people that we're impacting with our programming at West Michigan Intern Connect, with our weekly resume pack, we're welcoming them home on Thanksgiving Eve at our networking event. What was their perception before Michigan? But what was their perception of Michigan before we worked with them? And then what is their perception after? Because that's really how you can look, as a talent attraction organization, are you being effective in the job seekers that you're talking to? You can also look at ad campaign numbers, but those are advertising numbers, and everyone wants to know who saw an ad that relocated here. That can be difficult, but it is possible to look at.
Great. Well, we are approaching the end here, and I just want to draw everybody's attention to some of the fantastic comments that we've been getting in the chat. I've been trying to reflect some of them in the questions. I'm not going to get to obviously all of them by any means. A lot of, some of them have gone everywhere from political extremism to the potential of physical and mental health deserts for some communities that are losing population, diversifying business, possibly being a strong solution, especially as our college grads are looking for job opportunities and getting high value offers from other states, diversity. And I believe somebody did say, stop complaining, that we have to, teach ourselves and teach the people around us to just stop complaining about Michigan, which is interesting. So any closing thoughts from any of our panelists here today?
Speak positively about your community. That's the number one way that as an entire community, we can help with Michigan's population. Invite someone home for the summer and tell them to come visit.
I would just say, recently at the Mackinac Policy Conference, Richard Florida presented an analysis that said, Michigan really needs to understand you've got this collection of great places that add up to something very powerful. And I don't think we quite get that yet. And it's a good time to start really getting our head around that.
It's a great point.
I would agree to have a little more swagger and not be afraid to talk about how great we are. And towards that end, again, Paula, really appreciate all that you and Bridge have done in that regard to highlight the issue, because without that, we're not going to advance this dialogue further. So thanks for what you're doing, and hopefully what you continue to do is I think we try to keep up and advance this opportunity.
Well, thank you. So I'm going to kick this back to Jackie Garrett. Thank you all. Jackie?
Thank you all so much for your participation today. Thank you to our speakers, Marty, Rachel, Joshua. Also, thank you to everybody who tuned in today during your lunch break. I want to give a quick reminder, we will be posting a recording of today's program on Bridge Michigan's website and social media channels if you'd like to revisit it. It'll be being posted this week. And we will have an August event that will be announced very soon. So stay tuned for that as well. We'll be taking a brief break in July, but back to your regularly scheduled programming in August. Thank you all so much, and have a great day, everyone.